The title of this talk is Failure is an Option, which is all about how to help your chatbot fail without frustration. So it's not just a matter of you don't want your bot to fail. It's that we're not creating a strategic approach to successfully fail. And there are many different ways that I'm going to talk about today so that you can turn those frustrating experiences into good experiences, and you can take those failures and actually recover them. But more than that, you can actually get a user to trust you.